So we are going to carry on in Judges chapter 13. We're finally getting to, this is the stuff that I think of the most when I think of Judges. This is always my favorite part of Judges. We're getting to Samson, finally. Because I love Samson. This is my favorite part of the story. And you'll notice, they're going to have it up there on the screen. And it says in verse 1, and again the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. This is actually interesting because this is the first time we've seen this phrase in a while. Because actually, it seems like after the time of Jephthah, there was actually a 31-year period of kind of good behavior. Right? We had 3 or 4 judges in a row, and they were all, but none of them oversaw a period of falling away from the Lord. And so for 31 years, they remained faithful and good and in service to the Lord. And something else that's really important that we point out is that when they did fall away, as it says, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, that doesn't necessarily mean all of them. There's always been people outside of the normal pool that have always remained faithful to the Lord. In fact, we go all the way back to Moses wanders out into the desert, and who does he find out in the desert but a high priest to the Lord? Right? He's not one of the Hebrew people. He's not an Israelite. And yet he knew and he served God purposefully, even though he wasn't a part of these people, right? Just because they weren't Jewish or they weren't part of one of the tribes or anything like that does not mean that they did not believe. And in fact, many did. And we're actually going to read a story today about 2 believers who remained faithful to the Lord despite the fact that the rest of Israel seemed to be falling away once again. And so it says, so the Lord, as a result of them doing evil, the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. Now what's interesting about this is, when was the last time you read about the Philistines? It's been a while. In fact, it was actually chapter 3, verse 31, with Shagmar. That's the only reference in Judges of them coming up against Philistines. They've not yet done it. It was always Moabites or Ammonites or Amorites or a lot of the other ites, but never Philistines. This is up except for Shagmar, and there is some good historical reasons from that. They were people of the sea. They weren't necessarily from that area. They hadn't planted themselves in that territory, and yet now it seems that they have come and they have really planted their flag and they are going to take over. In fact, for the next 40 years, they are going to become a true power in the land of Israel. And they begin to oppress the Israelites and control them. But it says then in verse 2, a certain man of Zorah. Zorah is, of course, a town. And what's interesting about the town of Zorah is that it's just west of Jerusalem, and it's actually really, really, really close to Philistine territory. It's technically still in Israel, but it's very, very close to the nation of Philistia, I guess you would say. But there was a man named Manoah, and he was from the clan of the Danites, right, from the clan of Dan. And they were the coastal tribe on the west side of Israel. And he had a wife who was childless, who was unable to give birth. Does that ring a bell for anyone else? It sounds very familiar. It's another familiar story, something that we've seen before. A man who is faithful to the Lord, who hears the call of God, and his wife was childless and unable to give birth. And says then that the angel of the Lord, remember what that phrase means, the angel of the Lord? Who is that? It's Jesus, yes. Okay? This is going to be very important for something that's going to happen later, right? If we don't recognize that now, we don't recognize the significance of something that happens later. So it says, the angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, you are barren and childless, but you're going to become, first off, how rough is that of an introduction? Hello, you are barren and childless. Wow. It doesn't seem like something, it's kind of blunt, let's put it that way. It's very blunt. especially in a time and an era when having children, especially sons, was of supreme significance. Right? Having a son to carry. In fact, it was so significant, if you remember, when we go back and we read about their ancestors, there was the man Onan who had to go have relations with his brother's wife because his brother died, because the wife needed to have children to bear the dead father's name, right? Children were essential. They were paramount in their way of life. So to be barren and childless was quite the condemnation. However, you, as this angel of the Lord says, are going to become pregnant and give birth to a son. Now see to it that you drink no wine or other fermented drink, and that you do not eat anything unclean. You will become pregnant and have a son whose head is never to be touched by a razor, because the boy is to be a Nazirite, dedicated to God from the womb, and he will take the lead in delivering Israel from the hands of the Philistines. Couple interesting things that I like about this verse. Number one, if you're unfamiliar, the Nazirite, of course, is referring not necessarily like Jesus, where he was from Nazareth, but instead the Nazirite vow that we find in Numbers chapter 6. And if you're interested, you could go and read about that after. It's in Numbers chapter 6. And of course, if you forget that, you can always come up after service and ask me, hey, where was that reference? And I'll let you know. But in Numbers chapter 6, it outlines the conditions and why people would do the Nazirite vow. And one of the things that's interesting about a Nazirite vow is that it had a set period of time, right? You only served out your Nazirite vow over a set period of time. Very often it was a year. But in this case, as you read, it's not a year. In fact, he's going to be dedicated from the womb, and we're going to read later on, for his entire life until he dies. He is committed till he dies. The other thing that I really want to point out here is the second thing. He's been being dedicated from the womb, but has he even been conceived yet? No. This is the first message. He hasn't even been conceived. And this is one of the things and the only reason I mention it is because there seems to be a growing movement among Christians that seem to be more okay with the idea of abortion. And I say, look, this child wasn't even conceived yet, and God had plans for it. Like, how dare we think that we have greater plans and greater designs than God? It says in verse 6, then the woman came to her husband and told him, a man of God came to me, and he looked like an angel of God. So obviously whoever this is, there's something different, something special. They knew that this individual, who turns out to be the angel of the Lord, he was very awesome, as is described here in the NIV. Right? This person to look upon was different, was perfect. And they didn't know why. I didn't ask him where he came from. He didn't tell me his name. But he said to me, you will become pregnant and have a son. Now, then, drink no wine or other fermented drink, and do not eat anything unclean, because the boy will be a Nazirite of God from the womb until the day of his death. Right? This is a very strange Nazirite vow. But the whole point is he is going to be committed in a life living in dedication to the Lord, and it will be known to the people around them, especially to the Israelites who know the Torah, right? It will be known to them because he's going to have much longer hair than everybody else, right? He's not going to have his hair cut and his beard trimmed the way that they were supposed to, according to the law. He's going to look a little bit different, and but he will be living a life committed to the Lord. Verse 8, then Manoah prayed. This is why I love this story. So the wife is out somewhere, meets this man tells her something. She goes back. So the husband is completely unawares at this point. But obviously they have a very good relationship, right? This husband and wife have a very good relationship, and I think that they take the biblical principle of becoming one flesh very seriously. And he believes her enough to believe that, you know what, this wasn't just some strange man encounter in the field. You really do believe it's from God, but I need to know as well, so I'm going to pray. It says, Manoah prays to the Lord. Pardon your servant, O Lord, right? Don't want to put you out, God. I'm sorry. I beg you to let the man of God you sent to us come again to teach us how to bring up this boy who is to be born. What I love about this is he's praying for confirmation. Lord, you've told me something crazy. You're telling me my wife, who's never been able to have children, is suddenly going to be able to bear children, right? Remember Sarah, when she was told that, she laughed. Little old me? How is this possible? This is crazy. I love seeing Manoah's faith here in a time where it says Israel had fallen away and begun to do evil in the eyes of the Lord. Manoah still remained true and steadfast in the ways of the Lord. He believed in the law. He believed in the Torah. He followed it devoutly. And he went to the Lord directly for guidance. And it says, God heard Manoah, and the angel of God came again to the woman while she was out in the field. But her husband, Manoah, was not there with her. So the woman hurried to tell her husband, he's here, the man who appeared to me the other day. And so Manoah got up and he followed his wife. And when he came to the man, he said, are you the man who talked to my wife? I am, he said. So Manoah asked him, when your words are fulfilled, what is to be the rule that governs the boy's life and work? Then the angel of the Lord answered, your wife must do all that I have told her. She must not eat anything that comes from the grapevine, nor drink any wine or the other fermented drink, nor eat anything unclean. She must do everything I have commanded her. So Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, we would like to stay until we prepare a young goat for you. Why is this? They're trying to show respect and honor. You've given me a great blessing this day. You angel of the Lord, right? They don't recognize specifically who this is yet, but they know that this person, this being, has been sent by God. And that God is going to do a wonderful miracle in them. And that what was formerly impossible will suddenly become possible. And so they want to honor this guest that brings such good news. And then it says, the angel of the Lord replied, even though you detain me, I will not eat any of your food. But if you prepare a burnt offering, offer it to the Lord. And then it says, Manoah did not realize that it was the angel of the Lord. He didn't realize he was looking at pre-incarnate Jesus. He had no idea who it was that he was before. But he does as the stranger asks. It says, then Manoah inquired of the angel of the Lord, well, what is your name, so that we may honor you when the word comes true? And you have to see the parallel here. He replied, why do you ask my name? It is beyond, in NIV it says, it is beyond understanding. If you're reading a different translation, King James, ESV, it may say something, it is wonderful, or it is remarkable. How similar is that to the encounter Moses had? When he says, what is your name, that I may tell people who it is that sent me? And he said, I am who I am. Right? This is a very, this whole encounter, you just see that God, and it's one of those things that I've said many times before, and it's one of the things that I love that the Bible reinforces. God doesn't reinvent new ways to do things. He has a set way, a set behavior, a pattern that he follows, and we see it over and over and over again in the Bible. And here we are, we're seeing the same kinds of things play out once again. So then Manoah took the young goat together with grain offering, and he sacrificed it on the rock to the Lord. And then, and I read this to Claire because I was like, I was trying to help her. Well, I was trying to get her to maybe help me understand what this looked like. It said, and then the Lord did an amazing thing while Manoah and his wife watched. As the flame blazed up, so they're burning the offerings, burnt offering to the Lord, and as it blazed up from the altar toward heaven, then the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame. Now, if that doesn't solve whether or not you believe this truly is some sort of angelic figure, or who specifically this is, I don't know what is, right? I mean, up until this point, this is just some man that, some very, very influential, powerful, probably very fair-looking man. They're not sure who he is, but when someone just up and flies up into heaven, I mean, there's really no second guessing at that point. I mean, have you guys ever seen this? Okay, thank you. At least I'm not alone. I sat there, and the reason I said I was asking her is because I was like, did he just like zip up? Was it a slow ascension? Was it real gradual? Like, I don't know what happened here, but I can just imagine the shock and awe and wonder, amazement that Manoah and his wife must be feeling at this point. Seeing this, Manoah and his wife, of course, fell on their faces to the ground, much like every other encounter that anyone who had ever had an encounter with God had done before. Right? They fall on their face because they recognize they are unworthy. And when the angel of the Lord did not show himself again to Manoah and his wife, Manoah realized that it was the angel of the Lord. He recognized this was Jesus. Oh, and just in case you're wondering, how we could come to that conclusion. We are doomed to die, he said to his wife, for we have seen God. When they say angel of the Lord, they don't mean just an angel or some angelic being or some man with wings flying away. They're talking about God, about Jesus, Jehovah. And then when they fell on their faces to the ground, why did they fall on their face? Why did Joshua fall on his face? Why did Moses fall on his face? This rare encounter that had so rarely happened in the past. Why did they fall on their face? Because they recognize we are unworthy to be in the presence of the living God. We are undeserving to be in his grace. And of course, in the NIV, it says we're doomed to die. But in other translations, it just said we are surely to die. We are going to die. Why? Because they recognized, I have so much sin in my life. And if I'm going to be in the presence of a holy God, remember what God said to Moses when he was up on the mountain. He said, look, you cannot look at me in my full glory. It would kill you. But instead, you can look at essentially the wake of my glory after I pass by. And even that effect made Moses' face glow so much that it freaked people out and they had to put a veil over his face. Right? They recognized, just as Moses did then, just as Joshua did before, that being in the presence of the Lord, right? They couldn't stand it. But his wife answered, if the Lord, and this is why, by the way, I said, if you got a true, and I feel like any husband and wife that has been together for some time, they can recognize this as well, that, you really do become one flesh, and hopefully you've picked a partner that complements you, that helps you when you're weak. And of course, here's Manoah in a time of great distress. He's kind of freaking out, and what is her wisdom? His wife answers, if the Lord had meant to kill us, he would not have accepted this burnt offering and grain offering from our hands, nor shown us all these things that he now told us this. She brings that wisdom, that calm, that peace in the moment that Manoah needs. Then it says, the woman gave birth to a boy and named him Samson. And he grew up, and the Lord blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to stir in him while he was still in Mahana Dan, between Zorah and Eshtaol. Even while he was a child, there was still evidence that God was doing great things in Samson. And I'm looking really forward to getting into chapter 14, but I didn't want to start into that today because Samson's life, if you've never actually read the life of Samson, it's much more than just the story of Samson and Delilah. It's much more than that. Samson's life is incredible, and his journey is incredible. And it all starts here with two parents deeply devoted to God, despite the way the rest of their world had been going, despite the fact that the rest of their culture had all given up and gone back to the Baals and the Asherahs. And since seeing as the Philistines are here, we're probably talking about Dagon has been introduced as well. They've given in to worshiping false gods instead of believing and remaining true to the one true God who saved them from Israel and time again had delivered them from the hands of their enemy. How many times do we hear it over and over again? Where is God? Where is God? Why are things so bad? If God was real, why doesn't he save us from this? We whine and complain and we weep when we don't get our way. But the stories we read in the Bible are about those who held true and held fast despite the mounting pressure of the culture around them and said, no, God delivered us before. We are undeserving to be delivered. And we will remain true to him despite what we're going through today. As a result, they ended up becoming the parents to one of the greatest heroes that we get to read about in this book. That's obviously subjective, but that's how I feel about Samson. God sees all the little things that we do as well. All the big commit, right? It's not like God raised up Manoah then, a man of faith, to go out and do these things, but he used Manoah to raise up a son to do these things. And that's what we have to remember as we move forward. Sometimes God's going to use us, not maybe directly, right? It won't be our name that will be etched in stone and remembered forever. But God uses the faithful, those that stand by him, even when the mounting pressure around them is closing in and telling us that we need to abandon God and move on. You know, God's not real. You shouldn't be wasting your time. Why do you come out on Sunday to worship the air? But we know the truth. We know he's really there. We know he listens. And the more you spend time with him, the more you can hear his voice. And he will use you if you remain faithful.